Okay, so you want to own the Roman Empire. You picture the purple robes, the marble palace, legions marching under your banner, senators bowing as you walk in, an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt, all of it yours with a single word. It looks like the ultimate inheritance, absolute power, endless tribute flowing in from every province, a title that makes you the most powerful person who has ever lived. And for a handful of emperors, it genuinely was that good, decades of comfortable rule, monuments built in their name, a peaceful death in old age. But here's the part almost nobody tells you when they hand you the crown: you're not really buying a country. You're buying a subscription service where your only customer and your only real threat are the exact same people, the army, and by the end of this video you'll understand why missing a single payment to them doesn't cancel your subscription, it ends your life. Start with what you're actually buying. The title of emperor doesn't come with genuine, permanent loyalty from anyone. It comes with a temporary lease on obedience from roughly 30 legions and, more immediately dangerous than any of them, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own personal bodyguard stationed inside the capital itself. The guard doesn't just protect the emperor, historically they've been the ones deciding who gets to be emperor in the first place, because they're the only armed force close enough to the palace to act the moment they're unhappy. You're not inheriting their loyalty, you're renting it, and the rent is due constantly, in the form of cash bonuses called donatives, paid on accession, paid on anniversaries, paid whenever you need reassurance that today isn't the day they decide someone else should have the job instead. Here's the number that should worry you before you've even sat on the throne. Roman emperors regularly paid enormous lump sums to secure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard and the legions at the start of a reign, and the going rate only ever moved in one direction, upward, because every emperor who wanted to outbid a potential rival for the army's loyalty pushed the expected price higher for the next one. That money didn't come from nowhere. It came from provincial taxation, a system that had to extract wealth from every corner of an empire spanning 3 continents, moved along roads and sea lanes that themselves required constant maintenance and military protection to keep functioning at all. You weren't just paying the army to like you. You were funding an entire tax bureaucracy and a road and supply network just to be able to pay the army to like you, a cost structure with no natural ceiling because the amount required to buy loyalty kept rising with every transition of power. Now here's the mechanism that makes this job genuinely one of the most dangerous on earth. Your legitimacy as emperor isn't fixed by law, inheritance, or the will of the Senate in any way that actually protects you. It's fixed by whether the army currently believes you're worth keeping. The moment a general somewhere on a distant frontier becomes convinced his own legions would rather have him on the throne, and that they can be paid or persuaded to believe it too, that general has just as much claim to the position as you do, backed by exactly the same kind of force that put you there in the first place. This created a reflexive cycle across much of Roman history where a weak or unpopular emperor invited a rival claim triggered civil war drained the treasury and army resources needed to actually defend the empire's frontiers, and a drained frontier invited exactly the kind of external pressure that made the next emperor look weak and unpopular too, restarting the entire cycle over again. A real example of how catastrophically literal this buying the throne problem could get is Didius Julianus in the year 193. After the previous emperor, Pertinax, was murdered by the Praetorian Guard for cutting their pay, the Guard did something almost unbelievable. They held an open auction for the throne itself, standing on the walls of their camp and taking competing bids from wealthy senators who wanted the job. Didius Julianus won by promising each guardsman a payment reportedly around 25,000 sesterces, an enormous sum, essentially buying the empire outright in cash. The problem was that the wider public and, more importantly, the legions stationed on the frontiers were furious that the position had been sold so openly and shamelessly to the highest bidder. Multiple frontier commanders declared themselves emperor in response within weeks, and one of them, Septimius Severus, marched on Rome with his own army. The Praetorian Guard, having already taken Julianus's money and seeing which way the wind was blowing, simply abandoned him. He was killed in the palace after a reign of roughly 66 days, having spent a fortune buying a job that the people who sold it to him weren't actually willing or able to defend when a bigger army showed up. There's also the frontier problem, which never actually goes away no matter how secure the capital feels. An empire this size has borders thousands of miles long, facing constant pressure from tribes and rival powers who have every incentive to test weakness whenever it appears. Maintaining that frontier requires legions stationed permanently in unglamorous, often dangerous postings far from Rome, and those legions need to be paid, supplied, and kept just as loyal as the Praetorian Guard back in the capital, except now you're managing that loyalty at a distance, through generals who have their own ambitions and their own direct relationships with the soldiers under their command. A general who successfully defends the frontier for years builds exactly the kind of reputation and troop loyalty that makes him a credible rival for the throne himself, which means your own most competent military commanders are simultaneously your empire's greatest asset and its single greatest long-term threat to your own position. Let's put rough numbers on the scale of what you're actually managing. At its height, the Roman Empire's population is estimated to have exceeded 50 million people spread across territory covering roughly 2 million square miles, defended by an army numbering in the several hundreds of thousands once auxiliary forces are included. Administering, taxing, and defending a territory and population of that scale with the communication speed of a horse or a ship meant that by the time news of a frontier crisis reached the capital, and a response was organized and marched back out, months could have already passed, during which a local commander often had to make consequential decisions entirely on his own authority, decisions that could just as easily be the foundation of his loyalty to you or the first step of his own bid for your job. So does owning the Roman Empire actually work? In the optimistic scenario, yes, spectacularly, for exactly the emperors remembered as the good ones. You secure the loyalty of the guard and the legions early and keep the treasury healthy enough to keep paying them without bleeding the provinces dry. You manage your frontier generals with enough trust to let them do their jobs and enough oversight to prevent ambition from curdling into rebellion, and you can rule for decades, dying peacefully and passing the position to a chosen successor. In the pessimistic scenario, you inherit a weakened treasury or an unpopular predecessor's mess, you're forced to raise taxes or cut the army's pay to cover the gap, a frontier commander senses the opportunity, and you find yourself in exactly Didius Julianus's position, having paid an enormous price for a title that the very people who sold it to you are unwilling to actually defend once someone with a bigger army decides they want the job more than you do. The Roman Empire was never really a country you could own the way you own property. It was a fragile balance of loyalty, cash, and fear, constantly renegotiated with the only people who had the actual power to enforce or revoke it, and the title of emperor was really just a temporary lease on that balance, one that could be cancelled at any time by exactly the same force that had granted it in the first place. The purple robes were real. The palace was real. But underneath the marble and the marching legions sat one of the most dangerous jobs in human history, and the moment the army stopped believing you were worth the price, the empire that made you the most powerful person alive became the exact thing that ended your life.